Welcome back to KneeToKnee. I'm your host, Mark Merritt, and today I've got someone that had me genuinely excited from the moment we jumped on that pre-podcast call. Eric Robinson has spent years as a pastor, running a church built for people who didn't usually set foot in one. And then, in what might be the most unexpected pivot you'll hear about this year, he left the ministry and joined the FBI. From there, he spent 15 years in SWAT and became an instructor in tactics, firearms, and fitness, and built the kind of brotherhood most men only read about. So let me pause right there just for a second. If this conversation hits home with you, do me a favor and hit that like button and make certain that you subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. We've got some incredible guests lined up, and I'd love for you to be there with us. And Eric is one of those guests that we've had lined up for quite some time. And we got into some real stuff today. Resilience, identity, and what happens to a man when the thing he built his whole life around suddenly ends. And the one skill he says that made him a better in a ministry, in the FBI, and every relationship he's had since. And it's not what you'd expect, so get ready and let's get knee to knee with Eric. Welcome to another episode of Knee to Knee. I've got somebody totally cool for you today, and I have delivered yet again. I am very excited to have with us, as we talked about in the introduction. Eric is here with us. So Eric, welcome so much for coming on and spending a few minutes with us.
Thank you. And hopefully I live up to your expectations.
Yeah, it's a normal thing for me to say. I'm super excited, but sometimes there are those guests that I go, oh my gosh. So as we talked about in the introduction, there's some really cool things Eric has done. But before we got on a call, he started asking about the St. George Marathon. So we started chatting a little bit about running, which, as those of you that know, I loved racing hand cycles. It was one of the fun things that I did in my life. And so Eric, tell us, I'm really curious now. You mentioned marathons. You said how many marathons did you run? And you mentioned that your wife is now running.
The wife's running them. She's still going. But my wife got into it a little bit later, and she says, oh, I want a PR for the next one. I go, sweetheart, you're in your 50s. You're not PRing. It goes down from here. It doesn't go up. I ran a little bit in college just for fun, some 5Ks. But as I was in ministry, I developed these stress-related headaches, and the only thing that relieved them for a period was running. So I'd go out and do, an occasional run, and I'd go, oh, wow, I had some relief. And I had these headaches every single day. And so I'm like, wow, maybe I should run further, because if I'd run further, okay, that's more time without the headaches. And then I get a little afterglow and, and then maybe 5 p.m.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, start hurting again. So I ran my first marathon in 1997, which doesn't seem like that long ago, but it was a long time ago, and qualified for Boston on my second marathon.
On your second, that's amazing. Yeah.
I was going out and I'm like, this feels good. And I asked some senior guy, like, am I going too fast? He said, yeah, you should slow down. And then I passed him and went on from there.
Yeah, some people, everybody's built different in those marathons, right? We had an old neighbor who actually is the one that encouraged me to start doing any racing. My first race was in a wheelchair doing a 5K, just my everyday chair. That's all I had. And he is an old mountain goat, and we lived up in northern Utah in the mountains, and he didn't start running till he was 40, and in his 70s he qualified for the Boston Marathon.
That's awesome.
Which is amazing to me, right? He was just this way, way cool guy that kept pushing me around the corner. Mark, you got to do this. You got to go do this. All right. But definitely glad I got into the racing. It was fun for a few years. You mentioned that your wife's next one is an ultra. Is that correct?
She's running an ultra and getting ready for it, and just trying to, at this point, you're trying to keep those injuries down, the nagging stuff.
Yes.
I was fortunate when I ran. I really never got injuries, but then back injuries are what now keeps me out of running. My PR was 2:52, which is
nice.
like a 6:25 marathon. And I'll say that openly because I ran 26 miles at a speed I can't run 1 mile at anymore. So I'll just remember when.
We all have those days. It's like, I remember the days when I was lifting heavy and stuff, and yeah, lifting that way now, it ain't gonna happen. I'm just saying, I look back and go, man, I could lift the car back then. Let me see. Can I lift my briefcase? No, that's not that bad.
Yeah, just be functional now. Just be functional.
Exactly, exactly. So you mentioned a second ago that you were involved in ministry. So you went
Yeah.
from, we mentioned that in the introduction a little bit, but you went from ministry, which a lot of people, there's many people that start in that process. But the one I'm fascinated with is obviously, I'm sure you've talked about before, but I want to understand more deeply about that transition from ministry to the FBI. Those don't always seem to connect, but yeah, I would love to know a little bit more about.
Well, as we had started a church that was meant to reach out to people who didn't normally fit in a church, and we are doing well, successful. People coming, people are being changed. We're being very open to them. And one of the issues I found was when you start a church for people who don't go to church, a lot of times they have personal issues. They brought those to me, and I wasn't able to disconnect, and that caused me stress. And after 2 years of every day having these headaches and seeing doctors and getting no relief, I eventually told my wife, I've got to find a job that has less stress. And so I'm like, the FBI sounds
I'm
cool.
sorry, I'm
Let's try.
laughing. I'm thinking, wait,
Well, it's meant to be.
SWAT?
It's meant to be funny, but
Yeah, I'm
it
like,
really
okay.
it's a different stress.
It is. Yeah.
I never had the day I got accepted in the FBI. Headaches went away, which was my cue that okay, that was the right choice.
Yeah,
The
definitely.
stress in the FBI, that comes up, but then I was able to flush it away because it wasn't somebody in my church who's having problems that I now am, percolating over. The stress in the FBI was you've got a task, body says, okay, I'm going to give you juice for it, get it done, and then you're moving on to the
It's
next
over.
task and you're fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's definitely a different kind of stress, but so how did you, I mean, obviously you have the task, you go through it, but there's so many people that have those tasks, they get stressed, they're going through whatever, but they're not able to release that in the sense of let it go to move on to the next one. How were you able to find that piece? Right, because that's the important piece. I think that a lot of men really need to be able to have a better understanding of how to disconnect before they go on to the next thing.
Well, for me, it was just finding a different path. I couldn't do it. And, I'd be scared to go back and try it again and see if it's still, how does this work for me now? But I was pastoring a church that was doing things the way I thought they should be done. I thought this is great. We're successful. We're having an impact. And so that's why I fought with it for so long, despite being in pain. And then stepping out from there. I was in my late 20s, early 30s. So still fairly young, still that kid who was running fast marathons. And now, 24, 25 years later, I see the difference of having gone through difficulties, trauma, poor decisions, and I recognize now the courage that it takes to go through because no matter what choice you make, humans believe have an unhealthy fear of what poor mistakes will create in their lives. So we underestimate the resilience of the human body, and you can speak to that.
Right.
And we overestimate what trauma, poor choices, hardships will do to us. Because, and again, you're the perfect example. I'm sure you thought in that moment of your injury, my life is over. And you don't realize, I mean, your story is a good one of how you have overcome, but you don't realize that even in that, you're able to recenter your life. It's different. But now, you still feel joy. You still have these moments that were unexpected. So
Yeah.
for me, it was, after all this period, now knowing, okay, we'll get through it. We'll be on the other side.
Yeah, I think that was one of the things, for myself when we talk about accident and things like that. I vaguely remember those first 10 days was drug induced and in and out of consciousness kind of thing. But I remember my wife and I specifically saying, okay, this is the cards we were dealt. How are we going to handle this? What are we going to do moving forward? And creating that. And I hate to, it's almost cliche-ish, but that new normal, right? It's never going to be the same, but there is kind of a new reset, as you mentioned, where, okay, here's where I'm at now. Where do I go from here? And I think that's the big thing that it was interesting the other day. My wife, Victoria and I were talking about those transitions in life that sometimes are very hard to navigate from one. I can't do this anymore. So what am I going to do now to bring joy? What am I going to do now to do this? And I can look back, and I think all of us can look back and go, oh, you used to, I'm not running marathons anymore. right? And so those are the things that I think are the transitions that I think people struggle with most, is when there is an ending of I hate to use the word era, right? But an ending of a time in our life where now we need to transition to the new thing.
Yeah. And if you have that experience and you're self-reflective, then you can have courage and you can have peace. You can say, well, look, I've done this before and I've harmed myself and I've made a bad choice. And here I am. And you can speak to the new normal, but it's just a recentering. My life is different. I don't run anymore. Now I do pull-ups like a beast. So now there's that.
So instead of using your legs, you're now using your upper body. Awesome job. So, and
Absolutely.
so
I have a
besides
little
the
chicken
pull-ups
leg.
are good because it stretches the spine a little bit and gives you probably some relief in your
A little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. I have, because after my accident, there's times my back gets tight and I'll end up going to the gym and I'll grab the lat pull down and I'll put it all the way to the heaviest weight I can get and just pull myself. I'm like, self traction. Let me
Yep.
just stretch that
Anchor your
baby out.
legs and then
Exactly. Just stretch that baby out. Always helps. So tell me about a little bit about, I mean, you end up in the FBI and you're transitioning through your career. I mean, you get as an FBI but then you end up in SWAT, which is its own level it's that next level in the FBI. And there's a really strong brotherhood with those that you're in the department with, that are in your group. Same as firefighters. We have the same thing. It's like, oh my gosh, there's this bond that, wow, is amazing.
so actually, and I'm going to go visit my buddies. I've retired now 2, 3 months, and there's going to be SWAT tryouts coming up next week. And part of that process is, they go through these events and we evaluate them, but part of the process is an interview. And we'll ask the guys who are candidates, why do you want to join SWAT? And the ones who have an idea say, I just see you guys and I see there's a camaraderie there that I want to be a part of. We think, yeah, that's the right answer. And then they leave and you go, they don't even know. They think they do, but they don't know until you're in it. Because without glorifying or exaggerating, when you go through regular life and death situations with guys, obviously that's going to bond you. That brings you closer together. So the best people I've ever met are in the FBI, and the best people in the FBI are on SWAT because we've
Right.
been there together. We've sat for hours in an armored vehicle waiting on things. We've done dangerous things together. And then we sit down and we talk about it later, not to decompress knowingly, but the sharing of those stories is it's a survivor story. Like, remember that crazy time that, we encountered this
Right.
guy. Phil went up the stairs and he ended up stepping on him because he was hiding under some clothes and had a loaded shotgun. Oh, man, that was
You
crazy.
remember that? Oh,
Well,
yeah.
Phil could have died, but he didn't. And here we are. We
Yeah.
survived.
Yeah. Yeah. I was actually, we've got an episode coming out here in the near future where I'm talking with an old fire buddy of mine from the Wildland Fire Days. And he and I had we weren't stepping on a guy in clothes that had a shotgun, but we had our own experience on a fire, goodness sakes, a lot of years ago. And it was one of those that we were lucky. Our whole crew made it out alive. It was a really stressful day. And we had people get hurt, but nobody died. And then I still remember the day we sat in the hotel room that night. They, finally, when they get us out of this area, they helicoptered us out. They gave us a couple of days of R&R because it was a brutal, brutal day. And we're sitting, he actually came into my hotel room and he sat on the bed and it was one of those bonding where, we're talking through the day and like you were talking about, you're going through that whole process. And it was amazing the walls that came down, because previous to that, yeah, we were on a crew and we were good and we were buddies, but now we're more than buddies, right? Now there's that bond, and he lives 5 minutes from me and we still talk, and it's been a lot of years because of that. That's still there. So it's an amazing thing to go through. And you're right. Unless you've been in it, you don't really understand how deep it can.
Yeah, we had an incident a year and a half, almost 2 years now, where the subject confronted us with a baseball bat. We gave him every opportunity to comply, even retreated to a bit. But then as he charged with the bat and yelled, "Kill me," he was killed. And part of how our team handled that, which was fantastic, was we had employee assistants and the chaplain in there. And rather than mandating therapy times or forcing an issue, went around the room. Every operator just told about what they did, and feelings came out too. But it was almost our typical after action review where we're just discussing what went right, what went wrong, what we saw. But obviously there was more to it, and that was a really good opportunity for everybody to share without it mandated. And we'd even get around the room, and here's a buddy of mine, Matt, who I already knew what he would say. He wasn't there. And he said, I felt terrible because here's my team involved in a
Yeah.
shooting, and I couldn't help them because, my kid was sick or whatever it was. And so he feels that. I mean, honestly, I think he probably feels a loss for himself that he could not participate in that moment. He was present. He probably felt he'd let people down. And so
Yeah.
just having that discussion was very useful for us.
Yeah, that would be a difficult thing. In fires and emergency management side of things, which is what my degrees are in emergency management, emergency services. We call that a hot wash after the fact, where we're going through and what worked, what didn't work. And I'm sure you guys use similar terminology, if not the same, but that similar process where you're going through that whole scenario, especially in larger incidents, where you're talking through things like that.
Right. And so we're learning this is a mistake, and we've made those mistakes before. We had one SWAT operation where we turned it over to the evidence team. Some of those, the agents are taking their vests off because now the house is clear. Everybody's handcuffed. Some of them are support staff. They're not even gun toters. And we turned it over, and one of our guys missed someone hiding in the closet. No harm done, but obviously we changed from there. Like, now what are we doing? You're seeing the floor, you're seeing the wall. You're not saying, okay, that looks clear.
So how long were you in SWAT for?
15 years. So by the
Okay.
time I retired at 56, there were guys on the team who could have been my legitimate children. And, I'd ask them, so what's your mom's name again? Got green eyes like me. I don't know.
Yeah, I recognize that one, right? As I get older, it's the same thing. I still remember the day that our youngest turned 24. He was in the Corps, and I called him on his birthday, and I'm like, "Happy birthday, son!" And he goes, "Thanks, Dad." And I'm like, "You suck." He's like, "Wait, what?" Because I didn't feel old until I realized that my youngest was 24, right? So, yeah, it's amazing how fast that time goes along those lines. So, you went from SWAT, and while you were a SWAT, you became an instructor, a firearms instructor. So
Yeah,
I'm really curious
firearms.
about those man skills, right? I mean, that whole process.
I had all the man skills. I wore every hat the
Right.
FBI can have. I was a tactics instructor, defensive tactics instructor, which is teaching folks how to handcuff and wrestle. I was a fit instructor, which people just hate because I'm telling them they're doing their push-ups wrong. So a lot of that is now I was working with the agents to make them the best they could be. And they had seen, the ones who are being honest would say, wow, like we'll watch the SWAT guys do it and we get regular practice, whereas agents would get quarterly training.
Yeah.
And they're like, you guys are so fast because it was like, learning the electric slide or whatever line dancing that I move here. I know this guy's doing there. I don't even have to tell him. If I have to bump out, I know he's going to move out of protocol to cover my back.
There's that muscle
And
memory that actually comes from being that bonded together.
it is. And when I would train the agents, I would freeze them. I'd say, hey, how do you feel right now? And the guy would go, well, I feel like I'm out on an island. And I go, right. And so now what should you do? You just see that guy moved to plug an open door, which means he's exposed to that open door over there. He's setting himself up to protect us by plugging that door. I need to now move and put a gun and my vest in line with him. And it should be that feeling of your spidey sense goes, that looks dangerous. Let me do something about it.
Right. Yeah.
And so the more training we get, just because sometimes I'd giggle because it's just so cool that I did this, they did that, and everybody just moved without talking.
Yeah. No, that is really cool to be able to experience that. So you've been retired a couple months now.
Yes, it's
Have you
nice.
had an opportunity? Yeah, I'm sure it is. Sure it is. Have you had an opportunity to look back at all the skills that you gained and whether it was while you were a minister or while you were in the FBI and all the stuff that you did there? Have you been able to identify and translate some of that into the daily life man skill side of things? Or have you been able to have a chance to think about that side of it to figure out how those translate?
Over the years, I'd see older guys retire, and I'm like, oh yeah, he was a good guy, and I'd know him. And then maybe 3 years ago, a friend, like this is my first buddy, retired, and I remember thinking, John went from being the best shot in our division to being just a guy now. Like he can still shoot well, but it doesn't mean much because you're a civilian.
Right.
And so there was a lot that I had to deal with leading up towards retirement of recognizing this is a lot of who I am. And soon I won't be that guy anymore. I'm going to be just me. So much of it is like just reflecting and coming to terms of I got to do something incredible, but more than that, that was an identity. And that identity is now just history. So it's been, the rest has been nice, calming down, but it has always been something I've feared of, like, how is this going to be to not be an FBI agent after that's what I was for so long. But, other than the shooting skills and the tactics that hopefully I can pass along to other officers or agents in some teaching manner, for me, it's been a short term, but it's just been reflection on that was great that I got to do that. Because I jump past the FBI time and I think I was just a guy. I was a pastor. They took a shot at me, and hopefully the FBI goes, "Yeah, that was a good choice."
Yeah.
But that pastor got to do all this stuff, and hopefully, I know I had an impact. I mean, I know I got to do good things.
Well, that's good. That's part of that self-reflection, right? When you look back and you can say, okay, because there's always things that we can go, I wish I would have done this or that, but there's always, those are the easy things to identify sometimes. And I think it's so important to look back and go, here's some of the good stuff that happened, right? Because if we just focus on that bad stuff, those are easy. It's the good stuff I think is really important that we need to remember and reiterate over and over, because it's easy to believe the negative much more so than the positive.
Yeah, I don't dwell on my mistakes. I like to think of this way. I like to do woodworking. I'm not great at it, but I do some projects. And there's times where I've spent hours working on something and then suddenly drill a little too far and crack the wood.
Yeah.
So I can start throwing stuff and fume, or I can just go, okay, now let's see what we can do. Mental note, maybe, don't
Don't
drill
drill
so
so
far
far.
next time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Absolutely. So just looking at the mistakes, going, okay, that was a mistake. I'm going to own that. Moving on.
And my wife often says, it's just data, right? It's just information, and you choose what you're going to do with that information. If you drill too
Well,
far,
absolutely.
like you mentioned, right, you're just going to go, okay, all right, let me just stop and take a different look at it.
Right. And I've been called out on SWAT before for making mistakes. And the first reaction is to be defensive or to
Right.
qualify. But if somebody wants to critique me, who's well-meaning, and I'm refusing that, I've just said to somebody, I'd rather not be better. I'd rather
Yeah,
not take
exactly.
what you're saying, and I'd rather be just as I am right now. You're trying to make me better by saying, here's what you can correct. That's foolish. Nope, let me listen and just own that and move forward.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, Eric, as we get to where we're wrapping up here, we're going to ask the same question we always ask of all of our guests, based off of our conversation today. What is one thing that our listeners can do today to build deeper connections with those around?
For me, one of the practices that I used and probably learned and honed a bit in ministry that I carried over into work in the FBI was to be curious and open. So
Yes.
if I believe that I have all the answers and I'm not listening to you, if I was a pastor and I said, "Hey, here's the Bible verses, this solves your problem," that's probably the last time you're coming to me.
Right.
In the FBI, as I'm working with victims and witnesses and even with the criminals, if I'm not open to what they have to say and I'm curious about this, letting them speak, drawing them out, instead of saying, I already know, I've got the evidence, then I'm losing out on a benefit. So through my career, I never regretted being open and being curious for what people had to say to me and learn from what they've got to offer. I can still judge and I can still have come back to my original belief, but it doesn't harm me. It only
No,
makes
it
me
doesn't.
better.
You're right. You're right. So that's a great one. That's great. We've had a lot of awesome answers over the last year and a half, and I think that's a really good one. I think it's really important to be curious and be willing to ask those questions or just find out. Well, Eric, thank you so much for coming and spending a few minutes with us today. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you taking some time. For those of you that are tuning in and you've survived another episode of KneeToKnee, thank you so much for coming and joining us today. And we sure appreciate all that you do and the time that you spend with us. Please don't forget to hit like and subscribe. You know all the stuff that we got to do just to kind of help build the channel. We want to get this information and these good things out to as many people and men as possible. So your help is greatly appreciated. And Eric, again, thank you. Everyone, we'll catch you on the next go around.